Before we begin, I want you to remember something. When people talk about D-Day, they remember the battle, the explosions, the thousands of soldiers who stormed Omaha Beach. But before they became heroes, they were ordinary young men with dreams, families, and plans for the future. Today, we're following a war correspondent whose only weapons were a notebook and a camera. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to witness history. And one soldier he met the night before D-Day would leave a memory he could never forget. June 5, 1944. Southern England. The countryside was filled with thousands of Allied soldiers. Military trucks rolled through muddy roads. Landing craft waited along the coast. After years of preparation, the largest invasion in history was finally about to begin. Daniel Carter, a 28-year-old war correspondent, had just received the assignment of a lifetime. His orders were simple. Stay with the first wave. If everything went according to plan, he would land on Omaha Beach with the first soldiers. If not, his notebook might be the only record of what happened. As Daniel walked through the camp, he met a young American soldier named Tommy Walker. Tommy offered him a cup of coffee. Daniel took one sip and immediately made a face. The soldiers burst into laughter. For a brief moment, it didn't feel like war. It felt like old friends sharing one last evening together. Later, Tommy pulled a small photograph from his pocket. It was his mother, smiling on the porch of their farmhouse back in Virginia. He looked at the picture and quietly said, "When this is over, I'm going home. I'll eat my mother's cooking and finally get the biggest dog I can find." Daniel smiled. Neither of them knew. Those simple dreams were only hours away from being tested by history. And as the sun disappeared beyond the English Channel, the countdown to D-Day had truly begun. The next morning, the camp woke before sunrise. No laughter, no card games, only the sound of boots, engines, and the cold wind blowing across the fields. Every soldier knew this was the day history would remember. Daniel packed his notebook, checked his camera one last time, and followed the soldiers toward the waiting ships. Thousands of men boarded landing craft in complete silence. Some looked out across the gray English Channel. Others quietly held family photos. A few closed their eyes and prayed. Among them was Tommy. He tried to smile, but this time, it didn't quite reach his eyes. As the ships slowly left the English coast, a message from General Dwight D. Eisenhower was read aloud. "The eyes of the world are upon you. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ocean crashing against the steel hull. Hours later, the sea became rough. The landing craft rose and crashed against the waves. Many soldiers became seasick. Others simply stared ahead, thinking about what waited on the other side. Daniel looked at Tommy. "You doing okay?" Tommy gave a small smile. "I've never been scared of the ocean." He paused for a second. "I'm just hoping I get to see home again." Daniel didn't know how to answer. Instead, he simply wrote those words into his notebook. As dawn slowly broke over the horizon, dark shapes began to appear in the distance. Normandy, the coast of France. The engines slowed. Officers shouted final instructions. Soldiers tightened their helmets and gripped their rifles. The ramp in front of them hadn't opened yet, but everyone already knew. There was no turning back. June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m. The landing craft slowed to a stop. No one spoke. The only sounds were crashing waves and the distant thunder of explosions. Daniel gripped his notebook tighter than ever before. Tommy looked toward the steel door at the front of the boat. Then he quietly reached into his jacket, touched the photograph of his mother, and took one deep breath. An officer shouted, 30 seconds. Every soldier stood, helmets secured, rifles loaded, faces pale, but determined. The naval bombardment had already begun. Massive warships behind them fired shell after shell toward the cliffs of Omaha Beach. The ground shook beneath the explosions. For a brief moment, it seemed impossible that anyone could survive on the other side. Then, the landing craft struck the sand. The ramp began to lower. Within seconds, machine gun fire tore across the open water. Bullets slammed into the front of the boat. The peaceful silence disappeared instantly. Go, go, go. The soldiers rushed forward into the freezing water. Some disappeared beneath the waves under the weight of their equipment. Others pushed ahead despite the relentless gunfire. Daniel followed close behind, struggling to keep his camera dry while holding onto his notebook. Everywhere he looked, there was smoke, fire, and complete chaos. Suddenly, he lost sight of Tommy. 1 second he was only a few feet away. The next, he had vanished into the smoke and confusion. Daniel called his name. No answer. He searched desperately through the crowd, but hundreds of soldiers were moving at once. At that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just history unfolding before his eyes. It was thousands of individual stories, being written all at the same time. And he silently promised himself, if Tommy survived, he would tell his story. If he didn't, he would make sure the world never forgot his name. Hours later, the sound of gunfire slowly began to fade. Omaha Beach had finally been secured. The price had been unimaginable. The shoreline was covered with abandoned helmets, broken equipment, and the marks of one of history's fiercest battles. Daniel walked across the beach in silence. His notebook was soaked with seawater. His camera was damaged, but the faces he had seen that morning would stay with him forever. As Allied forces pushed inland, they entered a small French village that had lived under Nazi occupation for 4 long years. The streets were quiet at first. Then, one by one, doors began to open. Children stepped outside carrying small Allied flags. An elderly woman embraced a young American soldier with tears in her eyes. For the first time that day, Daniel saw smiles instead of fear. At that moment, he finally understood why so many men had risked everything. Not for glory, not for medals, but so that people they had never met could live in freedom again. Before leaving the battlefield, Daniel searched one last time for Tommy. He never found him. Instead, a medic handed him a small waterproof envelope recovered from the beach. Inside was Tommy's final letter to his mother. Daniel held it carefully. Months later, after the war had ended, he traveled to Bedford, Virginia. He stood on the porch Tommy had described so many times. When Tommy's mother opened the door, Daniel quietly handed her the letter. She held it against her heart before reading a single word. No speech could ever ease that kind of loss. But his final words made sure a mother's love reached her son one last time. Today, when people visit Omaha Beach, they often remember the battle. But behind every white cross was someone like Tommy, a son, a friend, a young man with dreams that never had the chance to grow old. History is not only written by great victories, it is also remembered through ordinary people whose courage changed the world forever. And perhaps the greatest way to honor them is simply to remember their stories.